Family is a word that tastes different on every tongue. For some, it's honey warm, sticky, impossible to shake. For others, it's vinegar sharp, stinging, leaving a sourness that lingers long after the bottle is closed. I suppose I learned early which kind I'd inherited. My name is Danica Monroe. I'm 38, a researcher, a daughter, a sister at least by title. For as long as I can remember, I've been the shadow in the family portrait, the blurred outline at the edge of every celebration, the one who clapped from the sidelines, who never quite fit the frame. They say blood is thicker than water. But what if the blood you're asked to spill was never truly yours to begin with? This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about the moment I stopped bleeding for people who never saw me as blood at all. It was 2:07 a.m. when my phone vibrated against the wooden desk, slicing through the silence of my apartment. I'd been staring at my laptop, the blinking cursor on a half-finished fellowship proposal. When the screen lit up Mom, I let it ring once, twice, before picking up. Her voice was tight, scratchy, like she hadn't slept or had been crying. Danica, your sister's sick. It's serious. She has leukemia. Aggressive. They say she needs a bone marrow transplant. You're the only match. Still, I said nothing. I could hear her breathing, quick and uneven. Danica, her voice cracked, then sharpened. Don't be heartless. This is your sister we're talking about. My chest tightened at that word, sister. Seraphine, with her perfect skin, her practiced tears, her curated tragedies. The girl who once sent an anonymous complaint to my university dean, accusing me of falsifying research citations. Of course, I recognized the phrasing. Seraphine always did have a flair for melodrama and cruelty wrapped in silk. I stared at the blinking cursor, then said quietly, okay. Not yes. Just okay. I hung up. The room was too quiet after that. The only sounds the ticking wall clock and the hum of the fridge. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of that call settle over me like dust. What do you do when the person who tried to ruin your life suddenly needs you to save theirs? You pause, you breathe, and then you wait to see just how far they'll go. I didn't want to go to the dinner that weekend. My name had only come up because my mother had called my father's side of the family, practically sobbing about how I was refusing to save my own sister. So when Uncle Greg texted, "Hope you'll be at dinner. Seraphine needs the support," I knew it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Still, I went. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see just how low they'd stoop this time. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't the monster they made me out to be. They hosted it at my parents' place in Aurora, just outside Denver, a comfortable two-story colonial with manicured bushes and a wreath on the door that read, "Family is everything." I arrived 10 minutes early. No one greeted me. The front door was unlocked. Inside, laughter floated from the dining room. I stood at the threshold, scanning the table. Everyone was there: Uncle Greg, Aunt Naomi, Cousin Trey and his wife, even Cousin Mia, who lived 2 hours away. My father sat at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in hand. Seraphine sat across from him, wrapped in a blush pink scarf that barely concealed her hair loss. She looked fragile, elegant, the tragic heroine. There were 11 place settings. I was the 12th person. I stood there, blinking at the empty space where my name card should have been. "Oh," Mom said, rising halfway. "Danica, you made it." I nodded, still holding my coat. "There's a folding chair in the kitchen," she added. Of course there was. I got it myself. Dinner started like nothing was wrong. Chatter about work, Mia's upcoming wedding, Trey's new job. Not once did anyone ask how I was doing. When I mentioned I'd just submitted a research paper for peer review, My aunt smiled politely and changed the subject to Seraphine's new organic diet. Halfway through the main course, Mom cleared her throat dramatically. I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It means so much to Seraphine. We've all been through a lot. Seraphine dipped her head and gave a soft, rehearsed smile. Then Mom turned to me. Her voice got tighter, more performative. And Denica, well, we're still hoping she'll do the right thing, but she's always been independent, sometimes to a fault. Everyone looked at me. I kept chewing. She's thinking about it. Mom continued, like I wasn't in the room. Of course, we all know family means sacrifice. Uncle Greg chimed in, you don't turn your back on blood, not when it matters. My father said nothing. His fork clinked softly against his plate. I swallowed, set my fork down gently, and stood. Excuse me, I said. Danica, Mom started. No, I said, louder this time. I'm done. I walked past the table, past Seraphine's downcast eyes and my father's empty stare. No one moved to stop me. No one called out at the door. I paused for half a breath. So this is what family means to them. I thought they had pushed me too far, and I was finally ready to push back. I didn't drive home that night. I floated. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't sadness either. It was a strange numbness, like my body had shut off everything non-essential just to get me from point A to B, from the dinner table where I didn't exist to the apartment I paid for on my own, from being labeled heartless to remembering why I'd built a life as far from theirs as I could. I parked in front of my building, sat in the car with the engine still running, and stared through the windshield. The reflection of my own face stared back at me in the glass, hollowed out by years of trying to make peace with people who called it war. Upstairs, I flicked on the lights and tossed my purse onto the entryway bench. Everything was in its place, my books, my notes, the paperbacks I never finished. I moved on autopilot, kicking off my heels, unzipping my coat, until I passed the hallway shelf and stopped short. The photo album. It had been sitting there for years. Mom had made it for my 30th birthday. Just memories, she'd said. I'd never opened it again after that night, but now something pulled me toward it. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor and flipped it open. Page after page, there she was, Seraphine baby pictures, dance recitals, pageant dresses, a dozen snapshots of her blowing out birthday candles. Me, I was in the background, holding the cake, clapping from the sidelines. A blurry arm in the corner of the frame. And then there it was, a picture from when I was 6. Seraphine had just gotten her own bedroom, complete with new wallpaper and a twin canopy bed. I stood in the hallway, watching her grin for the camera, holding the keys to her big girl room. I remembered how Mom had leaned down that day and whispered, "Let her shine, Danica. You're strong enough to share." I closed the album gently. I wasn't angry anymore. I was curious. Something had always felt off. Different blood types. Nurses making quiet comments at school checkups. That one time I needed stitches, and Dad's face turned pale when they asked about allergies in the family. He'd stared at Mom, not at me. She answered for both of them. Now I couldn't shake the feeling. Maybe this wasn't just about resentment. Maybe it was about identity. Maybe I had the right to know who I even was. Chapter 2. The Test. The next morning, sleep barely touched me. My mind was a carousel of old conversations, half-remembered doctor visits, and the echo of my mother's voice. Family is everything. But whose family? Whose everything? I sat by the window with a mug of coffee gone cold, watching the city wake up. My phone sat on the table, screen dark, as if refusing to light up for anything less than an emergency. I turned it over in my hands, then opened a private browser tab and searched for DNA testing services. The site promised discretion, accuracy, and results in less than a week. I didn't have to look far for samples. Seraphine had stayed with me after a spa retreat last year, and I still had her old hairbrush tucked in a drawer under the sink. My own DNA was easy enough, a quick swab of my cheek. The kit arrived 2 days later, nondescript and clinical, with instructions written in the kind of language that assumed you were either desperate or in denial. I mailed the kit from a Dropbox 3 towns over. I didn't tell anyone. Not Eden, my best friend, not my coworker, not even the mirror. If I was expected to save her life, I whispered into the quiet, I deserved to know the truth about mine. The waiting stretched like a string pulled too tight. Days passed in fragments, work meetings, groceries, watering the aloe on the windowsill, pretending like my entire childhood wasn't hanging in the balance inside a manila envelope somewhere in the mail. I tried to distract myself with the mundane reading journal articles, organizing my bookshelf by color, even alphabetizing the spices in my kitchen. But every night, as I lay in bed, the question returned. What if I was right on the seventh day? It came. I opened the door expecting a package from the university bookstore. Instead, there was a white envelope addressed in a clean, serif font. My heart thudded in my chest as I carried it to the kitchen, hands trembling. I stared at the seal for a long time, thumb hovering, before I finally ripped it open. 2 pages, a lot of technical terms, but the words that mattered were clear, bolded near the bottom. Probability of full sibling relationship 0% 1. I let out a single, shaky breath. Not shock confirmation. I sank into the kitchen chair and let the paper rest on the table like it was something breakable. Seraphine wasn't my sister, not by blood and never by choice. They had spent my whole life telling me I was selfish, ungrateful, difficult. But maybe the real story wasn't about a daughter who didn't love enough. Maybe it was about a mother who had lied from the beginning. I leaned back, hands resting on the edge of the chair, letting the silence settle again. But if she wasn't my sister, then whose daughter was she? That question lodged itself in my chest and didn't budge, not through the rest of the night, not even after I tried distracting myself with laundry, a lukewarm shower, and the mindless comfort of late-night public television. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, playing years of memories on a loop. Moments I'd dismissed, now rearranged like puzzle pieces with new edges. By morning, I had a plan, not a confrontation. Not yet. That wasn't how my mother worked, and if I wanted answers, I had to ask the kind of questions she didn't see coming. So, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called her and asked if I could stop by. Just groceries, I said. Thought I'd bring you a few things. She hesitated. Then, well, if you're already out, that was her way of saying yes without sounding grateful. It was familiar. 40 minutes later, I was walking up the stone path of my parents' split-level home. The shutters had faded in the sun, and the mailbox still leaned slightly to the left. A few yellow tulips poked through the front yard. Mulch Seraphine's favorite, not mine. Mom met me at the door. No hug, just a once-over glance and a brief nod at the bag in my hand. You didn't have to get almond milk. Your father's cholesterol is fine now, she said, already walking back inside. I followed her into the kitchen. Same worn countertops, same ticking clock above the fridge. I placed the groceries on the island and began unpacking slowly, letting the silence do some of the work. I've been reading this study. I started casually about how genetic traits are passed down, blood types, recessive markers, stuff like that. She didn't look up from folding a dish towel. Oh, she said, neutral. Yeah, turns out blood types can actually prove parentage in some cases. Like, if two parents have O negative blood, there's no way their kid could be AB. Her hands paused, then continued folding. Science is always changing, she muttered. Back in my day, we didn't rely on all these fancy tests. We just loved each other. I offered a soft smile. Still, sometimes I wonder about that. All the random allergies I had as a kid. That time the school nurse said something didn't add up. She dropped the towel into the drawer with a sharp thud. Why are you always digging into things that don't matter? Danica. There it was. I shrugged. Just curiosity. I guess. You know how my brain works. She didn't answer. I let the conversation drift to safer ground weather. The grocery bill. The new neighbor's ugly mailbox. But inside, my mind was a hammer, and every word she didn't say was a crack in the wall she'd spent decades building. By the time I left, my resolve had hardened into something cold and precise. There was only one person I trusted with keeping secrets, and he hadn't spoken much since the divorce, my father. But there was a storage unit. When I was in college, Dad had listed me as an alternate contact on a storage locker he used for keeping tax boxes and holiday junk. I'd forgotten about it until I was sorting old emails one night and found the automated notice from the rental company. Payment due by the 25th. Contact Danica E. Monroe. It took one phone call and a key code to get in. The place smelled like dust and old glue, rows of steel units, quiet and cold. I found the one labeled 1167 and opened it with a soft metallic groan. Inside, chaos cardboard boxes stacked in uneven piles, faded labels, a broken wreath hanger, an old family printer. I pulled a stool from the corner and began digging. 3 boxes in, I found the folder manila, water-stained but intact. Inside, school photos, report cards, handwritten Christmas cards from relatives I barely remembered, a wedding invitation from 1988, then, tucked inside a plain white envelope, something that made my stomach lurch. A Polaroid mom, younger, softer, her hair still thick and brown, and beside her, a man I didn't recognize. He had dark eyes, olive skin, and wore a white coat open over jeans. They were standing just outside a hospital's double doors. Her head leaned slightly on his shoulder, a smile so unguarded I almost didn't recognize it on her face. On the back, scribbled in Mom's looping handwriting, Dr. Raphael, thank you for everything. That was the first time I felt like I'd entered someone else's story, someone else's truth, one I was never supposed to read. I sat on the edge of the unit floor, concrete hard under my legs, and let the silence press in. The name, the body language, the year Seraphine would have been born that fall. I placed the photo back inside the envelope and slid it into my coat pocket. The sun was setting as I left the unit. Gold spilled across the parking lot, hitting the windshield of my car with a slow, reflective burn. Back home, I poured a glass of water, sat at my desk, and opened a fresh file on my laptop. I titled it in bold family, rewritten. Then I typed the first line. This isn't about Seraphine. It's about the lie they all agreed to believe. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about Seraphine's lie. It was about the entire foundation we'd been raised on the night after finding the photo. I barely slept. My mother's face, so young, so unguarded beside a man I'd never met, haunted me. The caption, Dr. Raphael, thank you for everything, played on a loop in my mind. I realized then that the truth I was chasing was bigger than a DNA test. It was about the life I'd been denied, the story rewritten without my consent. By morning, I was resolved. I wouldn't storm in or shout accusations. That wasn't how my mother operated, and it wasn't how I'd get answers. I needed to see her, to watch her eyes when I laid the evidence on the table. I called her. Can I come by? A pause. If you're already out, that was as close to an invitation as I'd get. 40 minutes later, I stood on the stone path to my parents' house, the same one I'd walked so many times as a child, always feeling like a guest. The yellow tulips in the yard, Seraphine's favorite, were in bloom. My mother opened the door, her eyes narrowing when she saw me. "Danica, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said. "That's the point." Inside, the house was unchanged, the scent of lavender and wood polish, the ticking clock above the fridge, Seraphine's blanket draped over the recliner. I followed my mother into the kitchen, the manila envelope heavy in my bag. We sat. I set the envelope on the table between us. She eyed it warily. "What's that proof?" I said. "Of everything." She didn't reach for it. "If this is about that DNA thing again, it's not a thing," I interrupted, my voice steady. "It's a fact. A fact you buried for decades." Isibosis. I slid out the documents, the DNA results, the photo, the letter from Dr. Rafael Ortiz. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't touch them. "I don't know what fantasy you've let yourself spiral into, but your sister, she's not my sister." I cut in, sharp as glass, "Not by blood, not by truth, and you know it." A beat of silence. Then she exhaled, shoulders slumping. "So what? You think this is the time to play detective when Seraphine is ill, when the only thing she needs is your marrow and your decency." "Decency," I echoed, feeling my jaw tighten, coming from the woman who lied to everyone, including her own husband, for 30 years. Her voice rose. "You are being cruel, vindictive. You've always had this bitterness. I used to think it was just you trying to prove something, but this is just hateful." I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket and pressed play on my phone. Raphael's voice filled the kitchen, calm and clear. It was 1988. She worked in my unit briefly. We were close, closer than we should have been. Then she was gone. No forwarding address. I didn't even know she was pregnant. My mother's hands trembled. She clutched the edge of the table. "You recorded him." "Yes," I said, "because you've never told the truth unless someone cornered you with it." She looked older than I'd ever seen her. "I was scared," she whispered. "Back then, I had nothing. Your father wanted a perfect family. I thought if he knew, he'd leave. And I couldn't do it alone." "And what about me?" I asked, voice soft but unyielding. Didn't I deserve the truth? Didn't the girl you kept in the shadows for so long have a right to know why she never fit the picture-perfect frame? She looked at me, something like remorse flickering in her eyes, or maybe just exhaustion. I set down a folder, a written confession. 3 copies. One for you, one for Dad, one for the hospital's legal department if it comes to that. Her face blanched. "I'm not here to ruin your life," I said, "but I'm also not going to donate bone marrow to someone who isn't my sister just because you refuse to own what you did." Her lip quivered. "So you'll let her die," I said. "I'd consider it if you tell the truth publicly. You don't get to rewrite history just because it's inconvenient now." I slid a notepad across the table. "You have 72 hours. If you sign, we talk about the next step. If not, this story doesn't stay between us." She stared at the paper, hands shaking. "You're blackmailing your own mother." I met her gaze. "No, I'm finally giving you a choice." The back door creaked. My father stood there, groceries in hand, face pale. He'd heard everything, but I didn't stay. I walked past the recliner where Seraphine still slept, past the woman who'd kept me in the shadows, and stepped into the sunlight. I gave them a deadline. What they did with it would change everything. I didn't sleep the night before the deadline. Not because I was unsure, but because I already knew what would happen. Silence was an answer, and their silence had spoken volumes. That morning, I woke up before the sun, brewed black coffee, not because I needed the caffeine, but because routine gave me clarity. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder labeled Evidence. I had already redacted names, blurred out addresses. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, truth without blood on it. The blog I chose, Medical Ethics Matters, was one I'd followed quietly for years. They handled whistleblower cases delicately, with nuance and care. I didn't need drama. I needed daylight. By 9:42 a.m., the article was submitted under the alias D. Martin. Title: When the Family Tree Lies. A researcher's private discovery of paternity fraud. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The sky was a clean shade of blue outside, like nothing had changed. But by noon, everything had. The blog published the piece within 3 hours. It exploded across Reddit, X, and Facebook groups dedicated to family rights and medical consent. The anonymity didn't last long. Someone found a Colorado University research photo of me on an old grant website. "Is this the whistleblower?" one tweet read. The rest was wildfire. Comments flooded in, half appalled, half fascinated. Paternity fraud, bone marrow guilt trips, inheritance manipulation. People had stories of their own, some messier, some eerily similar. By dinner, the local news was hinting at a shocking case of DNA deception unfolding in Boulder. One academic has reportedly uncovered. And then came Seraphine. She posted a curated carousel of childhood photos on Instagram, us in matching pajamas, her in recital dresses, me clapping in the front row. The caption read, "Sometimes the people who smile at your successes are the ones who resent you most." I'm fighting for my life, and someone I trusted is trying to destroy my family in the process. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. "Stay strong, Queen. Jealousy is a disease." Then she went further. In a post to her 15,000 followers, she wrote, "Some people would rather break glass than admit they were never the center of attention, even if it means publicly humiliating their own blood. I won't play along." Attached was a blurry photo of me from college, taken after a campus mental health seminar. The caption insinuated instability without saying a word directly. The blow landed. I felt it in my chest, not because I believed her, but because I knew thousands would. Then my mother joined the act. In a short clip on a local news segment, she sat calmly in her living room, pearls around her neck like armor. "Every family has secrets," she said softly, "but dragging them into the public eye doesn't heal anyone. It just spreads the wound. No apology, no accountability, just polished deflection." The public ate it up. My inbox filled with strangers calling me bitter, vindictive. Ungrateful daughter outs mother to feel important. Someone even emailed the University Board of Ethics demanding I be professionally evaluated. By the end of the week, the dean's office sent a polite but pointed message. "We're requesting clarification on your involvement in the recent media activity related to the blog article titled, 'When the Family Tree Lies.'" That night, I turned off all notifications, closed every tab, pushed my phone deep into the kitchen drawer like it might bite. Then I sat in the dark with my laptop open, the cursor blinking in a folder I hadn't named until now, War. I opened a blank document, began organizing everything: the DNA test, Raphael's voice recording, the blog metrics, screenshots of the posts and their timestamps, even the messages I received. Evidence wasn't just truth, it was pattern. But I didn't send anything, not yet. Instead, I wrote one sentence into a new email draft and stared at it for a while. "Let's meet, no threats, no drama, just an invitation." And I sent it, because sometimes the strongest move isn't shouting louder. It's setting the stage and letting them step into the light. The morning of the meeting, I woke up before sunrise, not because of nerves. Those had already worn thin days ago, but because my body couldn't rest with the weight of what was coming. I dressed with care. Nothing flashy, nothing submissive, just a navy blouse, pressed slacks, and a pair of flats that made no sound on hardwood floors. On my kitchen table sat a single folder labeled in black ink, Truth, inside printouts, test results, Raphael's notarized statement, screenshots of Seraphine's smear campaign, and a formal agreement I'd spent the last 2 nights drafting. I didn't eat breakfast, just brewed coffee, let it go cold, and stared out the window until it was time to leave. The mediation center sat tucked between a dentist's office and a law firm neutral, bland, clinical, exactly what I needed. I arrived 10 minutes early. Harper was already in the waiting room, giving me a quiet nod. "You okay?" she asked, handing me a bottle of water. "I don't need them to apologize," I said, gripping the folder. "I just need the truth to exist somewhere other than my own mind." By 10, everyone had arrived. My mother walked in first, clutching her bag like a weapon. Seraphine followed in designer sunglasses despite the cloudy sky, arms folded like a child dragged into church. Raphael entered last. He nodded at me once, said nothing, and took his seat at the end of the oval table. His silence felt heavier than any accusation. The mediator gave a brief statement about confidentiality and civility, and then it was my turn. I slid the folder into the center of the table and opened it. "This," I said, "is the story you tried to bury." No one moved. I handed out copies. Seraphine flipped through hers with dramatic detachment. My mother didn't touch hers. The DNA test confirmed what I suspected. I continued, "Seraphine and I are not biological sisters. Rafael Ortiz is her father." "I am not?" My mother exhaled sharply. "Danica, this obsession of yours, it's cruel. Your sister's sick and you want to humiliate her like this." "She's not my sister," I said flatly. "And this isn't about cruelty. It's about ending the rewrite you've been performing for decades." Seraphine scoffed. "So what? You're gonna air this out to the world for what, some moral victory? No, for restoration," I said. I pulled out a single-page contract. "If both of you sign this and agree to publicly acknowledge the truth, I'll authorize the Marrow donation." My mother laughed, a bitter rasping sound. "You think this is leverage? Who do you think you are?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and pressed play. Raphael's voice filled the room, calm, clear, undeniable. "Yes, I had a relationship with Mary Beth Myers in 1988. I didn't know she was pregnant until recently. She disappeared. I never got the chance to know Seraphine, but I believe she has a right to the truth." Silence followed. My mother's face paled, her mouth opened, then closed. She slumped into her chair, blinking fast. Then Seraphine stood up, eyes blazing. "Fine, you want the truth? I knew. I've known since I was 17, her voice cracked. Mom told me after my first hospital scare. She said it didn't change anything, said I should never, ever tell anyone, especially you." I stared at her, barely breathing. "I let them blame you for everything," she whispered. "When I couldn't keep up in school, when I lost that fellowship, even when Mom said you should have been the one taking care of her." I said nothing. "I forged those emails, the ones that got you flagged at your university. I needed a win. You were always so put together." Harper leaned forward, jaw tight. "You tried to destroy her career. I didn't think she'd fight back." Seraphine said, tears pooling now. "I thought she'd just take it, like always." I slid the document back toward her. "This is your chance, not just for me, for you, too. You want to stop pretending. Start here. Raphael spoke then, his voice low, furious. You used my child to destroy another. The room froze. He stood up, walked to the window, then turned. I don't want revenge. I want acknowledgement. Danica, he looked at me, and maybe one day, a second chance. I nodded, throat tight. Back at the table, 2 pens lay beside the agreement. They both reached for one, but only one of them signed. Seraphine had already signed. No hesitation, no fanfare. Her signature, small and unsteady, sat at the bottom of the page. Just above the date, a tiny mark of surrender. I waited. My mother finally pushed back her chair with a slow scrape that cut through the room. No, she said, folding her arms. I won't be humiliated for your bitterness. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Her voice was calm, controlled, which made the sting land harder. Raphael shifted slightly in his chair, watching her, jaw clenched. Harper sat frozen beside me, one hand resting over her mouth, as if even her breath might break the room apart. I carried this family, my mother continued, voice flat. I kept it from falling apart. And this is how you repay me. I said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. She grabbed the unsigned copy, tore it clean down the center, and dropped the pieces onto the table. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her checkbook, and tossed it next to the shredded contract. Add. That's for the utilities on the Boulder house, she said. Don't ever contact me again. You're dead to me. The door clicked behind her like a verdict. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It buzzed with everything unspoken betrayal, resentment, grief. Seraphine shifted slightly, head low. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then her body jerked. Her eyes rolled back. She gasped like the air had been yanked from her lungs, and before I could move, she collapsed sideways in the chair. Seraphine Harper leapt up, catching her just in time to keep her from hitting the floor. Raphael was already dialing, his voice sharp but controlled. Yes, Mediation Center on 28th. Cardiac distress, female, mid-30s now. I knelt down beside Seraphine, my hands hovering just above her, unsure where to touch, how to help. Her skin had gone clammy, a pale sheen crawling up her forehead. She opened her eyes just long enough to meet mine. Then they fluttered shut again. The paramedics arrived fast, too fast. Maybe someone in the building heard the panic and called too. We rode in silence to the hospital, sirens slicing through the static in my chest. At the ICU, I paced. Harper sat near the vending machine, head bowed over her phone. Raphael stood by the window, arms crossed. No one spoke. Even the hospital air felt heavy with consequence. A doctor stepped into the hallway, pulling down his mask. She's in critical condition, he said gently. Her body's failing faster than expected. If she doesn't receive the transplant in the next 24 hours, she won't survive. I nodded. It was the only thing I could do. In the dim light of the ICU room, Seraphine looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her body, hooked up to machines, looked fragile in a way that felt like betrayal. This was the same woman who had weaponized attention, who could twist a dinner table into a stage, and now she looked like a child who had run out of stories to hide behind. Her eyes fluttered open as I stepped closer. You came, she whispered. I sat down. Of course I did. She blinked slowly. I never expected forgiveness. I stayed quiet. But thank you for giving me this last chance, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't answer, not with words. I reached into my bag, pulled out the surgical release forms the nurse had handed me earlier, and signed them without looking away from her. I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for the girl I used to be, the one who once stayed up making flashcards for a sister who mocked her spelling, the one who believed that truth mattered, that integrity counted for something, the girl who got left behind and who deserved to be seen. Finally, as I handed the forms to the nurse, she gave me a nod and disappeared down the hallway. The gurney arrived minutes later to wheel Seraphine toward surgery. I stood at the edge of the corridor, watching as they turned the corner. The operating room was cold, but my resolve was colder. The sterile scent hit me first, then the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, steady and soft. I blinked through the haze and saw Raphael sitting near the foot of my bed, holding a bouquet of white tulips, my favorite. Not that I'd ever told him. He stood as I stirred, voice low. "Welcome back." I nodded slowly, my throat dry. "How long?" "Just over 24 hours. Surgery went well. They said you were strong." He paused. "She's stable for now." The tulips shook slightly in his hand as he passed them to me. There was no card. I glanced around. No other flowers, no balloons, no Mary Beth. I leaned my head back against the pillow. Some silences don't need to be broken. He sat again, lips pressed into a line of tired grace. Neither of us spoke for a long while. By the time I was discharged, the clouds had shifted. It rained briefly on the drive home, just enough to streak the windshield without needing the wipers. I took it as a quiet reset, a clean breath. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I had just finished a slow walk around the block. My body still sore, but my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. Seraphine stood on the porch, thinner, pale, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big. She didn't wear makeup. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. No cameras, no statement pieces, just her. In one hand, she held a manila folder, in the other, a frame, wooden, worn, and familiar. "Can I come in?" she asked. I didn't answer. I stepped aside. We sat in silence for a minute on the couch. She placed the folder between us first. "I wanted you to have a signed copy in case you ever need it again." "Public record, notarized. It's real." I nodded once. Then she handed me the photo frame. Us as kids, no filters. No red eyes removed or edges trimmed. Just two little girls, muddy and grinning, holding popsicles in the summer sun. "I can't fix the past," Seraphine whispered, her eyes still on the photo. "But I won't lie about it anymore. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see what I had." I let her words hang in the air. "No, it's okay. No warm reconciliation. I didn't have it in me, and she didn't ask for it. Instead, she stood up slowly, winced, and looked at me one last time. "You deserved better," she said, "from all of us." I didn't follow her to the door. I just watched it close behind her. The envelope came a week later, plain white. No return address, but I recognized the seal, my old university. Inside, a letter. "We apologize for the premature termination of your academic affiliation. After further review and external clarification, we are reinstating your name and inviting you to return as a guest lecturer this fall." I held the letter in my hands for a long time. Then I folded it, slid it into my coat pocket, and walked. The park wasn't far. There, beneath the same elm tree where Dad used to sit beside me during long summer afternoons, I unfolded the frame Seraphine left behind. Tucked inside the backing was a note written in small, uneven cursive. "You were the real sister all along. I just didn't know how to love you right." The wind rustled the leaves overhead, sending a cascade of yellow across my lap. I leaned back, closing my eyes to the breeze. I wasn't heartless. I was just tired of bleeding for people who only knew how to take. And in that moment, beneath the mountains, under a sky that didn't ask anything of me, I remembered who I was before the guilt. before the manipulation, before the lies that turned love into leverage. I didn't save her to feel like a sister again. I saved her because I finally remembered who I was before they told me I wasn't. Sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that set us free. I spent years searching for belonging in a family built on secrets, giving pieces of myself to people who never truly saw me. In the end, it wasn't blood that defined me, but the courage to face betrayal, to choose honesty over silence, and to reclaim my own story. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about forgetting or excusing the past. It's about releasing its hold and making space for something new. As I step into my future, I carry the scars, but I also carry strength. I am not the sum of their lies. I am the author of my own life, and at last, that is enough.